Hello, I am Dr. Steve Johnson, the director of the master's degree program in clinical counseling here at Columbia International University. I'm also the president of the Albert Ellis Institute in New York City. And I want to welcome you to this mental health series on topics that are relevant to mental health during COVID-19. And this particular episode, among the 5 that I will be having in this series, the topic will be dealing with stress and anxiety during COVID-19. Before we start, I want to really look at 2 different terms that are tremendously important that we grasp as we move into this topic, and that would be the difference between a stressor and stress. When we talk about a stressor, we're really talking about a situation or some kind of event that we are going through. Whereas stress is in many ways the response to that situation or the event. In fact, it is more precisely the automatic kind of physical or physiological responses to perceived threat within our environment. And then the response includes this cascade of physical, physiological, and chemical and hormonal responses to that perceived stress. Among those kind of stress hormones are as follows. The first one to be discovered historically was adrenaline, and we've all heard about adrenaline, that chemical that is pumped into our blood system that makes us kind of super strong within situations. We'll get to that a little later. So that was the first one that was discovered. And then the second was what is often called norepinephrine or noradrenaline. And the third one, which plays an absolutely key role in understanding stress and our body's response to stressors in our environment, is cortisol. So to kind of put this into context, if we look at our nervous system, there's one part of our nervous system called the autonomic nervous system. This is the part of our nervous system that covers automatic kinds of events within our body. Not things that we have to think about, but things that happen without our conscious awareness, such as heartbeat and blood pressure and all of those very important activities that are fundamental to life. And that autonomic nervous system is divided into 2 parts. One we call the sympathetic nervous system, and the other one the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is really kind of that part of the system that when we perceive a threat, activates the body. It activates the body to address that threat. In fact, that's what when you were younger and you learned about, kind of attacking the environment, stress responses, those kinds of things. This is what we're talking about. The body gets activated for fighting or flight or actually freezing. So all of those are protective mechanisms to preserve life. The parasympathetic nervous system does the opposite. It calms us down once the perceived threat has passed or we have dealt with it. Now, if we go back to that sympathetic nervous system, there are several things that it does that are very important for us. One, it raises our blood pressure. It helps our muscles tighten up to prepare them for action. Glucose is kind of released and fat, both glucose, which is kind of like sugar, and fat are emptied into or released into our blood system so that we have the energy to act. Breathing increases so that we have more oxygen to keep the muscles active. Heart rate goes up, and then there is the release of cortisol and adrenaline and norepinephrine. Now, is the activation of the sympathetic nervous system helpful? Yes, it absolutely is helpful in the short run, not in the long run, but in the short run, It is really, really important. It has a positive effect of stress, meaning it prepares us to address something that we perceive as threat. Now, that threat could be an actual threat in the environment or something that emotionally we are seeing as a threat. But either way, we perceive this something as a threat, whether it is or not. We perceive it as a threat, and our body is prepared to address that threat. However, in the long term, if we perceive threat, especially if there is no threat, and this happens over and over and over again, then it is not helpful for us. In fact, it really begins to damage our body in many, many different ways. And let me just show you, or kind of explain some of those long-term consequences of us having our sympathetic nervous system activated for perceived threat. One, it can cause kind of allergic skin reactions. In the long haul, it can cause anxiety, cough, depression, actually diabetes in the long run. It really predisposes us to that. It can cause dizziness, heart problems, heart irregularities, heartburn, hypertension, high blood pressure, infectious diseases. Our immune system is suppressed, and so we're more prone to contracting an infection, irritable bowel syndrome, nervousness would be really common. It can increase pain within our body. If it happens post-operatively, it can cause kind of increased swelling, contribute to rheumatoid arthritis, can make the effects of cancer and cancer treatments worse. It can slow the healing of our wounds and create trouble sleeping and all kinds of things. So you can see that in the long haul, having that activation, having our sympathetic nervous system activated and prepared for threat, especially when there is no threat, can be really have negative consequences for us. And in the extreme, over a long period of time, if we experience stress, that can be associated with the development of anxiety and depression, which are really quite serious over the long haul for us as individuals. So let me stay right up front that if you do end up, if you've been subjected to stress for a long period of time, and look, we're in the middle of COVID-19. So for about a year now, we have been subject to a lot of stress. It doesn't mean it's been constant, but it's there. There is perceived threat in the environment, a threat to our very lives or the lives of our loved ones, or a threat to our way of life that we were used to, the fun and the enjoyment that we had. So there are perceived threats. And over the long haul, if we do end up experiencing anxiety and depression, especially anxiety and depression, if they interfere with our daily life, it's preventing us from getting things done that we need to do, like job or interpersonal relationships or taking care of the family or even taking care of yourself in healthy ways. If this anxiety and depression are getting in the way of those daily lives, it is time to seek professional help. And the kind of professional help I'm talking about is go to a physician, go to a licensed mental health professional so that you can get help for that, because these are very treatable conditions. Let's look at when to get help if you're experiencing anxiety. If you're engaged in kind of extreme worry and fear and panic, even over things that don't really seem like they're a threat, but we're experiencing those on a continued basis, get help. If you have these irrational fears or a sense of dread about being in the world or that danger is lurking around every corner, get help. If you have frequent physical symptoms in the absence of a real threat, and you're having all of those things that I talked about, high blood pressure, difficulty breathing, dizziness, any of those kinds of things, get help. And then if you have recurrent distress, emotionally, or thoughts that are really dark, or uncontrollable repetitive behaviors, seek help if you have those. All of those are associated with anxiety. Now, when to seek help if depression is there. Again, if the depression is getting in the way, if it's interfering with your daily life, then seek professional help. The same kind of professional help that I just mentioned, especially if we see these kinds of symptoms. Prolonged kind of feelings of sadness or irritability. You may not have both, and younger kids tend to get more irritable than sad. But, it can be sadness, irritability, or both. If there's a loss of interest in the activities that were normally enjoyable to you, yeah, get help. If you have a lot of sleep disturbance, you're having great difficulty getting to sleep, or you get to sleep but you have difficulty maintaining sleep, and you wake up in the middle of the night worrying and have great difficulty getting to sleep, and then you wake up about the time that you've only had about a couple of hours of sleep or whatever, yeah, it's time to get help, because we really need sleep to be resilient in the face of perceived threat. If you are experiencing a lot of guilt, in particular, and also a sense that you're worthless or that you're hopeless about life or your life, immediate help for those kinds of things. And if you are really anxious to the point where you can't even sit still, even panic maybe, then you need to do that. Or repeated or prolonged trouble concentrating on things, or you're having major difficulty making life decisions. All of these can be symptoms of depression that do warrant seeking help. So let's understand that. So, get the kind of help that you need. Now, let's look at when we are under stress. There are helpful things that we can do when we're stressed out, and there are unhelpful things to do. And let's look at those unhelpful responses to stress, and then I'm going to spend a good amount of time looking at things that we can do when we are stressed out, especially if it ends up in anxiety. One, unhealthy responses, and I'm going to go through a number of those. And if you have several of those, then it may be time for you to seek some help for that. One is if you're watching endless hours of television, or you're on the television or YouTube, or you're engaged in many hours of gaming. Those are distractive activities that prevent you from engaging in life, and not a healthy way to deal with stress. Now, a little bit of watching TV or gaming or those kinds of things can be temporary distractions that are good, but if you are spending hours upon hours doing that, then it is getting in the way. Two, if you're withdrawing from family and friends and you valued those relationships before, that's an unhealthy thing to do. We want to engage in life, not withdraw from life. If you're engaging in all kinds of activities to avoid facing problems in life, you're just so busy that you're just not facing problems, that's not helpful either, because there are decisions to be made during COVID, some serious decisions at times, and if you're avoiding the problem, then you can't make those serious decisions. If you're overeating to the point where you're just gaining significant weight, or you're undereating to the point where you're losing significant weight, it's time to get some help. If your sleep is disturbed, and I've already mentioned this, if you have difficulty getting to sleep or staying asleep, you're not getting enough sleep, and then you wake up feeling tired and not rested at all, those are unhealthy responses to stress. Another major unhealthy response about which I'm concerned, especially as an addictions therapist, is inappropriate substance use, where instead of facing problems and to try to calm yourself down, you're resorting to drinking or taking drugs. Then, and that are not prescribed by a physician or a person who is licensed to prescribe. that can actually end up causing you major, major life problems. If you're engaging in violent outbursts, either verbally or physically, that's a really unhealthy stress response. You may notice that you're increasing the frequency with your that you're smoking, legitimate or illegitimate kinds of smoking, right? Tobacco or weed. And so if that's happening, or you stopped smoking and now you've brought it back. And when I say smoking, I'm also including vaping and that stuff. That's an unhealthy response there, because you could really do some damage to your body. Or you may not be engaging in any kind of illegal drug, but you're misusing over-the-counter drugs. A lot of people are taking diphenhydramine, to sleep, or Benadryl, or those kinds of antihistamines that can make us woozy and get some sleep. If the doctor prescribes that in the short run, that's usually non-problematical. But if you're doing it on your own without consulting and it's ongoing, then it is time to seek some help. And then, of course, if you're using illegal drugs, or even drugs that are prescribed for you, but you're not using them as directed or appropriately, again, really important for you to get help. Those are all unhealthy ways to deal with that. So take an honest assessment of your life right now, or those of your loved ones, especially those who are in your care, children, maybe your parents or whatever, your loved one. What are they doing? If they've been stressed and they're acting in these ways, then you might want to have a gentle talk with them, but persistent, to see if you can help them reach out for help. There are 3 really key, healthy ways to handle stress, 3 of them. And I'm going to put each of these is kind of 3 major umbrellas of things to do. And under them, I will talk about some specific activities, okay? Concrete things that you and I can do when we are feeling stressed out, and a little bit later, I'll get to specifically if we're feeling anxious in the midst of our stress, some things that we may be able to do. One umbrella would be relaxation techniques. So when we're stressed, we need to relax. And so there are things that you can do to relax. And we're going to work toward a plan for you. You will develop the plan for you to try to deal with this. And you may do this in consultation with your physician or your therapist or counselor, whomever, if you have assessed that you really need some professional help, or you're getting feedback from people that it's time for you to get professional help. So one would be relaxation techniques. The second one is self-nurture. This means really kind of taking care of yourself. If you're letting yourself go, you're not engaging in relaxation, relaxing activities, or you're not eating properly, you're not connecting with others, because it's really important to connect with others. Even biochemically it is. When we connect with others, a chemical is produced in our body called oxytocin. And oxytocin is a really feel-good kind of chemical. And it happens naturally when we are connected with those whom we love and we enjoy. Okay? So it's very important to connect. Relax, connect, and then engage in activities that are enjoyable for you. And you go, I've never been really good at kind of taking care of myself and engaging in self-care. Well, maybe now's the time for you to experiment with doing some things that you've never done. I noticed my daughter, one of my daughters, who is a psychotherapist herself, used this time during COVID when, she was engaging in some social isolation, seeing clients by telehealth, but she started painting and really found that enjoyable. Another one was involved in, kind of raising plants and creating beauty in her environment, etc. My mother, who has been stressed out, confined to home because she's 89 years old, and COVID can be quite dangerous for that age group, and so she's enjoyed connecting with other people in healthy ways. She learned how to use her iPhone and looks on Facebook for some good friends of hers. A third is a term called cognitive restructuring. Cognitive restructuring means changing the unhelpful ways that we tend to think about the threats in our environment to more helpful ways. Because when we change our unhelpful ways to helpful ways, then our emotions change and our actions change. So it's really important that we monitor our thinking and that we develop healthy ways to thinking rather than engaging in negative kinds. And I'll talk about these really unhelpful ways to think and how we can move away from them and embrace more healthy ways of thinking. But let me go back to that first category, that first umbrella of key healthy ways to handle stress, and that was relaxation techniques. And there are lots of things that we can do. Now, no one may work for, it doesn't mean that all of them are going to work for you, but this is a time to kind of take an experimental approach. Try them out. See which ones work better for you and which ones don't work so well, and then put them together and create a kind of routine of doing these. I think of it as having kind of a relaxation toolbox. And you pull out of that toolbox those things that are kind of helpful for you. But you do it on a schedule so that it becomes habitual and you're doing it actively and taking charge of your life in that way. One of those is kind of diaphragmatic breathing, which is easy to do. You put one hand here on your chest, and you won't be able to see it, but I put one on my abdomen. And then what we do in diaphragmatic breathing is when we take a breath, only move the hand that is on your belly, on your stomach, your diaphragm. But don't move the one that's up here on your chest. When we're anxious, when we're breathing really fast, when we're trying to get oxygen, etc., we may be breathing very fast, taking short breaths, which will contribute to dizziness, etc., which will then our body perceives that we're the threat level goes up. So don't move the top hand that's on your chest and move the bottom hand. And then breathe very slowly and then exhale and breathe out as much as possible. And then slowly do that. And if you can do that, even if it's 10, 15 seconds, 15, 20 breaths over a real, stretch it out. Don't rush. That can really lower the stress levels. And by the way, there are apps that you can get for your phone, and it will measure they will measure your breathing, etc. So you might just do a search for those. Another one that's really helpful is what we call progressive muscle relaxation. And this one is relatively easy. I taught this one to my daughter when they were really, really little. And every night we would go through this progressive muscle relaxation. They loved it. And by the way, when my one daughter went off to college, she said she was stressed with some exams. And I said, what are you doing? She goes, the progressive muscle relaxation that you taught us when we were really little. And this one is really quite simple. You just stretch out in an area that's relatively calm and quiet, and just get in a comfortable position. And what we're going to do is a series of tighten muscles and releasing them slowly. Tighten and release. Now, when you tighten those muscles, don't tighten them so much that you get cramps or something. We're not trying to harm ourselves. And if there's a part of your body where you have trouble, so I have trouble with my neck. I had surgery on my neck. They put rods in and all kinds of things. So I have to be somewhat careful with my neck. And so I won't tighten my muscles so much there. I'll be more cautious. So if you have areas like that, or if you have lower back pain or pain anywhere, just be a little more gentle in those areas as you do the progressive muscle relaxation. And if you have doubts, always talk to your physician before you engage in some of these activities. But progressive muscle relaxation, you begin at your toes usually, and you tighten your toes to a count of perhaps 10, and then release so that they're relaxed. And then you want to tighten the entire foot. So every time we go up the body, we tighten everything that we tightened before and release it. So we're going to be tightening the toes and the whole foot, right? Again, not so much that you cause cramps. Tighten and then release. And then up to your knee. So that would be your toes, your foot, and all the way up to your knee. So I'm not going to name them progressively every time, but you get the picture. And then up to the hips, your rear end, your stomach, your chest, your fingers, your whole hand, up to your elbow, up to your shoulder and neck. Again, I carry stress in my shoulder and neck, so I'm not going to tighten that too much, but I will do a little bit. And then up to your face. I mean, you know, when I was in New York, I would do it on the subway, but I didn't care what people thought. If you're a little more self-conscious about that, it might be a good idea to go to your room, because when you're tightening your face, it might look a little strange, you know, like that. And then even the top of your head. And then progressively go through this. And I'll tell you, more often than not, when I do that, I fall asleep by the time I get to the top. Meditation. If you have meditation, which what some people do from different religious traditions, is they may read their holy book, you know, the Bible or the Torah or Quran or something like that. They'll read it and they may hit a passage that's really important to them. And then they just kind of meditate very calmly on that. It doesn't have to be religious in nature. You might just do it by counting, you know, and when you count, or reflect on a peaceful scene, that kind of thing, which we'll get into a little bit later. So meditation. If you want to do what I call moving meditation and get a little exercise, that can be helpful too. Now, always check to see whether these practices are consistent with your religious beliefs. We don't want you to engage in anything that would be in violation of those religious beliefs. Activities like yoga or Tai Chi or Qigong. I mean, I'm older and I was having trouble with balance and some stress. And so my doctor recommended Tai Chi. He said, you know, it may have been originally tied to some religion, but now it's kind of an activity in a form of meditation. You don't have to have any religious ideation there at all. And I found it really helpful. And for elderly individuals, it is really helpful for them to develop balance. And so, if, you know, again, always talk to your physician about something like this. But these moving meditations can be very relaxing for some people. One that is often that people ignore because they often see it as a religious duty sometimes is prayer. Prayer has a wonderfully calming effect for many people. In fact, if you pray and you pray, you know, kind of repetitively, then that can be very, very, very soothing for a number of people. So it's worth trying out. Visualization. So if you just take some time in a calm place, sitting in a chair, stretching out on the bed, or you know, if you're working and you just go out to your car, you can do the same thing, you know, safe place, and you just visualize a scene that's very calming for you. Maybe the beach, or I have a friend that visualizes skydiving, which would instill terror in me. That would not be relaxing at all. But you know, everybody's a little different on these things. So visualize it, or guided imagery. I know my wife got me an alarm clock, and if I press a particular button, it walks me through guided imagery. Very, very nice gift. And there are apps for your phone that will have some guided imagery that will have you relax and have you take steps to relax. Another one that's really helpful is this one comes from cognitive behavioral therapy. It's called, you know, it's a relaxation technique where you just take like a walk, maybe a 20-minute walk or so, 15, 20 minutes. And what you do is, as you're walking, you sequentially focus more on one sense and then move to the next. So for example, in your walk, you might pay attention to what you see and just take it in. Don't judge it. Don't look at your house and go, oh man, I need to paint that. No judgment. No judgment zone. We're just taking a walk and taking it in, because the senses are avenues for us to be grounded in what's around us. And instead of just living way up in our head and just having the thoughts go over and over and over. We call that rumination, when someone's just thinking about something over and over and over again. And rumination is very common in anxiety and depression. It's very hard to be anxious and depressed without having ruminative thoughts. And if the rumination gets even more intense, we call it perseveration, where you just can't seem to get over that kind of thinking. So this is take a walk, and we're going to focus on the senses. So notice what you see, and then shift over to more to hearing. Now, if you're out, don't close your eyes and run into traffic or something. That would, be counterintuitive to actually relaxing. So, but pay more attention to the sound. You will hear things that you don't normally hear because you're so much into your head. Even that sound of the wind, or, a dog barking, or birds chirping, etc. Any number of things. And then move to touch, even the feel of your foot on your sock and in your shoe and on the sidewalk, or maybe your foot on the grass, whatever it is, the weight of the clothes on your body, etc. Okay? But really get in touch with that, and even taste, etc. So sequentially go through those, very relaxing. And then finally, connect with others. It is really important as a relaxation technique to just take out time, call someone, meet up with someone in a safe way, and just talk. It doesn't have to be about anything tremendously important, but just something that's enjoyable to the two of you. Okay. Now, among those things, I think I just named like 8 different things. Try to choose some of the things and practice them, and see which ones kind of work for you. Some of the others might not be. You know what? I'm not into the Tai Chi and Qigong kind of stuff, but I really find progressive muscle relaxation and prayer to be helpful. Then do it. Or the visualization is really helpful. Do that. Some of these are better done in the morning or late in the evening. Progressive muscle relaxation can be a great way to start the day or end the day. Visualization can be in the middle of the day, the end of the day. So you might even want to time when you do those and see where you get the most benefit. Okay. Now, another area that we want to take care of is proper nutrition. Again, consult a dietitian or your physician if diet is tremendously important for you. I'm diabetic, for example, and what I eat, I have to be, concerned and cautious about what I eat. But sometimes when people are really stressed out, they crave carbohydrates. The junk food, the processed carbs, the donuts, all of those kinds of things are craved. And yet sometimes that'll cause a big fluctuation in your blood glucose and can have you kind of emotionally crash later in the day. So it's helpful if you eat balanced meals, and your physician or a nurse or somebody can be really helpful in helping you to do that. Okay. Another technique is to engage in creative activities. Maybe you like to paint, write. Maybe you want to journal. Maybe I've had friends that decided they want to write a diary, or they want to write a book during this time. I had a friend that just is an amazing kind of guy, but he's written 10 books during COVID. I mean, that guy is on fire when it comes to writing. So if it's calming, then do that. And then I said cognitive restructuring. That was that third key healthy way to deal with it. And this is to change the thoughts that are contributing to stress and to anxiety, right? And it's pretty easy, because there are 4 kinds of beliefs that kind of are not real helpful for us. One is what we call demandingness. This is, we think it, we don't have to say it, but we're thinking some kind of demand upon us, or it might not be on us, but it could be a demand that we have for somebody else, a demand that we're placing on life or the world. And when we place a demand, and the demand doesn't, and we or another person or life isn't the way we demand, we set ourselves up for some stress and some negative emotions, including anxiety. So certain words are kind of tip-offs that you're being demanding. Words like should, ought, must, have to, and need. And sometimes even expectation. Often an expectation is just another word for a demand. Sometimes it's not, but often it is. So if I go, I absolutely have to be safe. I absolutely have to be loved by everybody in my environment. I absolutely, I must get the food that I want. I can't do without that. People should pick up the phone whenever I call them, when I need them. So these kind of demands, which are normal, they're just typically not very helpful, right? But again, because once you have the demand, because you're not God, life and the world and you don't even act according to your demands sometimes. And when that happens, you've set yourself up. So demandingness is not real helpful. Awfulizing, when we go, oh my gosh, this is terrible, this is horrible, this is awful. Now, if you say that, a couple of times or, very sporadically, no big deal. That's just what it means to be a human. But if you are spending a lot of time engaging in this is awful, this is terrible, and engaging in that awfulizing, not just every once in a while, but repeatedly doing that, you're sitting on the couch and you're just awfulizing, that is not helpful. And actually will pull you down into anxiety and depression. So those are the two. A third one is what we call frustration intolerance. This means this is when we believe that this is too much. I can't stand this. So COVID's too much. Social isolating is too much. Wearing a mask every time I go out and play, it's too much. I can't stand it, right? That kind of thinking isn't helpful at all. Now, we all do it. It's normal, but it's not helpful. In fact, that belief is key to anxiety. When we believe that we cannot stand being in the presence of a threat or perceived threat, it may not be actual, but a perceived threat, then we engage in that kind of thinking. It doesn't help us. Because if we believe that we can't stand something, then we get all kerfuffled and we get frustrated. And that frustration can result not only in anxiety and depression, but also inordinate amounts of anger. And then the other one, and these are more serious. This is what we call global negative self-rating. If you are rating yourself very, very negative, I'm a loser, I'm beyond hope, I'm beyond redemption, you're setting yourself up for the possibility of major depression, right? That is not helpful. Equally not helpful, depression often involves putting yourself down, that negative global evaluation. We also can think we're okay, but we can globally and negatively rate somebody else. They're no good, etc. I'm hearing that a lot in our culture right now. When we come from a different political party or we don't like what somebody believes or their actions, then we put them down as human beings rather than accepting them. So that's not helpful either. That contributes to anger, inordinate anger. And then global negative rating of life. My life is meaningless. It's useless. Those are scarier kinds of thought because not only can that be associated with depression, but people who are moving in the direction of suicidal behavior, that can be present. And anytime you're thinking in those ways, get help. Call 911, go to the nearest emergency room if that, or your loved one is beginning to think that life has no meaning or purpose and they're thinking of harming themselves. Quick action. Don't make promises that you won't say anything. Get help. And if they get angry with you, they get angry with you. But get help. And so if they go, life has no meaning or purpose, etc. Very serious kinds of thinkings that we want to take quite seriously. Now, what do we want to do? We want to catch those thoughts. And I want you to pose one major question to you when you are engaging in those kinds of thinkings. The question is, how is thinking this helping me? How is it helping me right here, right now, to say that I'm a loser? It doesn't help. It doesn't help at all. How is it helpful for me to say that other person is no good and they're an absolute loser? Nothing. All I get out of that is anger. And that's not helpful in the long run. That kind of stress over the long haul eats away at the inner linings of your artery through the adrenaline, will predispose you to high blood pressure and heart attack and stroke. We don't want to engage in that kind of stuff over the long haul. What about, how is it helping me to say that, to keep saying that something is awful, 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 awful? Again, not helpful at all. Or is it helpful in any way to say, I can't stand this, this is too much? They say, well, yeah, well, maybe that'll motivate me to go do something else. But you know what? You can be motivated to do something that's helpful just because it is in your best interest. You don't have to say that it's terrible and horrible or that you can't stand it. Just do it because it's in your long-term best interest to do that without going through the torture of those unhelpful beliefs. And then how is it helping me to put myself down, someone else down, the world down, all of that? None of that is helpful, okay? So we want to ask ourselves that question and convince ourselves this is not helpful, and then replace it. And then replace it with what? Well, instead of saying, I have to guarantee that everything is safe, instead of going, you know what? I hope, that by taking the steps that the CDC recommends, social distancing and masking and all of those kinds of things, I wish that I weren't going through this. It would be great not to have to go through this, but I am, and there's no demand that I shouldn't be going through this. This is just the way life is right now. Awfulizing. Instead of engaging in awfulizing over the long haul, go, yeah, this is bad. I don't like it. There's nothing about this that I like in general, right? But it doesn't negate the meaning and all purpose and all potential happiness in life. If we are at that point, we are giving far too much attention to something outside ourselves, right? Recognize that what it is. Be realistic. It's bad, but don't exaggerate that and treat it as though it's the Holocaust, okay? And so another one would be, instead of frustration and tolerance, I can't stand this, this is too much, go, I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't wish this on anyone, but I'm standing it. I'm not happy about it, but I am standing it. And that's a realistic thing. I'm not talking about the power of positive thinking. I'm talking about the power in realistic kinds of thinking, okay? So what we want to do then, and instead of globally negative rating yourself, go, you know what? I'm not perfect at things. I do things that are wrong, but that doesn't mean I'm totally worthless. I engage in unconditional self-acceptance of myself and others in life and the world. And I'll tell you a way how you can begin to unconditionally accept yourself in realistic ways, okay? Not just play a game. So, in fact, that is the goal here, to unconditionally accept yourself with your flaws, to unconditionally accept those around you with their flaws, to accept the world as it is, not like everything about me, not like everything about you, not like everything that's going on in the world today, but accept the reality of it. And then change the parts that you cannot change and adapt to the parts that you can't. Okay? So accept life as it is. So one of the things that is really helpful for you to move toward unconditional acceptance of the self is a little thing that you can draw on a piece of paper. Just draw a circle, and inside the circle write the word self. And then over at the side, just have a bunch of lines, and on that, just write down your roles in your life. Like my role would be a professor, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a son, all kinds of roles in my life. Don't rate the self. Just accept the self, because whatever you use to rate the self will be totally arbitrary. It's not worth it. It's kind of how God looks at you, right? Unconditionally accepting you. May not like all that you do, right? And then we can be the same way. Instead of rating the self, which we don't want to do, just because that's not going to go well, is rate our behavior within our role. So look, let me say, as my role as a son, then I could rate, let's say I get frustrated with my mom and I say something inappropriate to her. I go, wait a minute, that was not great behavior. Let me go apologize to her, repair that relationship to the degree that I can, right? So I'm rating my behavior in the role, but not globally rating myself. Or my role as a father, if I say something, I get frustrated and inappropriate and I say something, not helpful to my daughters, then that's not great behavior. Rate that as, that was poor daddy behavior, right? But don't globally rate the self. Unconditionally accept yourself. Here's the problem, and I'm going to be really clear here. If you don't unconditionally accept yourself, you'll probably sabotage yourself in some ways. Let me give an example from one that I'll be covering in a few weeks when we're looking at addictions or cravings that we have. I have individuals who are addicts that I work with, wonderful, wonderful people. And they will say, I'm not going to drink, I'm not going to drink, I'm not going to drink. And then something happens and they just fall off the wagon and they start drinking again. They lapse. And they beat themselves up. They put themselves down, that global negative rating. I shouldn't have done that. I'm such a loser. I mess everybody's life up because I keep doing this. Life's not worth living, and then just beat themselves up. And then you know what happens? One thought pops into their head. They go, there's one thing that always helps me when I get this low. And what is it? Drinking. So beating the self up and being demanding on the self, etc., is the next step in acting out again. It's not helpful. We don't want guilt. We don't want beating up on the self. If you've done something wrong, be remorseful and try to repair it to the degree that you can. Okay? Don't rate the self, rate the roles within yourself. Well, I want to thank you guys so much. We've gotten through this first topic, and we're going to be having a number of other topics, include issues of self-harm, cravings for food and alcohol, loneliness, you name it. We're going to be covering 5 different topics. We've already covered the first topic, so I hope you found it valuable and that you join us again in the next week. All the best.